Okay, well I'm here today because we have launched a murder investigation after a 15-year-old boy was stabbed and fatally injured last night, sometime after 11 p.m.
Almost on a weekly basis in the West Midlands, we're seeing worryingly high levels of gun and knife crime, with the consequences being tragic to say the least. On the back of two fatal stabbings of a 15 and a 16-year-old just a week apart in the region, it was time for another chat with criminologist Craig Pinkney. So Craig, we've seen a recent influx in violence. It seems to have spiraled. It seems to get worse every time I see you. I mean, already this week we've seen a 15-year-old in Wolverhampton. We saw a 16-year-old in Birmingham last week. We also heard of a number of shootings. What's your response to it?
My response is kind of similar since we last met. In a very strange way, it's kind of like all of the predictions that we made. I'm going to say we. A number of frontline professionals in the West Midlands had made 2 years ago. It's kind of everything's coming into fruition. And it's sad. It's a sad reality of the fact that, 2-3 years ago, I remember working in conjunction with an organisation called Community Vision, the director, Joan Campbell. And we'd done a series of free seminars in the community for professionals, for parents, and also for young people, talking about basically, is Birmingham in a state of emergency? Is the West Midlands in a state of emergency? And there was a series of things that I spoke about of what is potentially to come. So what are we seeing now? Young people, 15 years old, dead. We're seeing young people as young as 13 are now carrying knives, bringing them to school, using them at school. And we're watching the news and we're observing all of the things in which we probably didn't expect to happen. But there's also another problem that I also mentioned as well, that violence is not specific to one particular community. So what we're noticing now is that violence is now spiraling out of control in other communities, where we're seeing individuals now being shot, individuals being shot at, and individuals utilising weapons. Now, as a criminologist, I've always said that violence always exists and always has existed within communities. However, the media would like to post a picture or create a picture or a narrative that it's only for one specific people. And I can go as far as my TED Talk, a number of years ago, and I said that it's not a one particular group's problem. It's a societal problem. And I think what we're starting to see now is a rise and an increase of violence that is affecting communities as a whole. You heard me mention fear, and you heard me talk about fear in one of our last interviews, and my stance doesn't change. I feel that we live in a society now where our young people are fearful of potential things to happen. And I also give the idea and an example and said, if I was 14 or 15 years old in current day society, I potentially would carry a knife. And I have to get people to understand the psychology and the thinking of young people. You hear about violence, you see violence, you experience violence. That's bound to have a detrimental effect on young people. Now, quite recently, it was I've discovered that the last young man that was killed within the West Midlands, this was a young man that was or had attended one of my sessions on knife crime only a year ago. So when I hear things like that, for me, it kind of reminds me of the reality and the social reality in which we're living in.
Very close to home, essentially.
And it's a weird and it's a sad one at the same time. Not to say that that young person was, involved in anything like that, but what I'm talking about is it's young people that we're working with in the community, talking about raising awareness, talking about strategies that they can make themselves feel safe in the community. And then some of them become victims. And, as hard as it is as professionals, we have to be realistic in the sense that we're human beings and we're going to be emotionally connected to this type of work. So I think the question that everybody's asking is, well, what needs to be done and what should be done in regards to that? And again, my stance hasn't changed either. And I think part of the problem is is what society tend to do is point blame. So, for example, there's a lot of discussions now about social media and drill music. And as I've always said in terms of my current research, that yes, social media is definitely a factor that's contributing to violence. Yes, certain types of music is contributing to violence within the community, but it's not the only reason. And we can't keep blaming those things as the main factor of why young people behave what they do. We've spoke about the impact of the cuts. We've spoke about the fact that issues around mental health and trauma and young people becoming more depressed and anxious within the society and traumatized within the society. We spoke about the lack of community investment, the lack of business investments within the community, young people having poor education, young people living in environments of, poor housing, or environments that they perceive to be violent. And all of those particular factors are contributing to the wider conversation of why young people are behaving the way that they do. So when we talk about what is the solution, and people say to me, well, Craig, what is the actual solution? I always say that the solution is not one, it's multifaceted. But for me, it's about, in terms of you as a professional, as a parent, as a member of the community, what is your strength? Be honest, find your lane. And when you find your lane, execute, and don't keep having this narrative of nothing's going to change. I always say that violence is on the increase for a series of reasons. Therefore, it's going to require a number of people to respond to the issues adequately. We know that in terms of young people that they're utilizing social media. So I always say to people, why don't we use social media platforms in order to educate? And why I kind of rate the fact that you're an individual that goes in the community and, interviews people, because it's a counter narrative. It's a narrative that other individuals that might be inspired about some of the things that we're doing right now and thinks, I want to do that in this, whether that is art, whether that is business, whether that is music, whether that is education, whether that's raising awareness, whether that's about mental health, sexual exploitation, terrorism, extremism, and all of those different facets that can essentially assist young people, but not just young people, the people that are trying to help young people. I'm functioning in one particular lane. So what about everybody else coming to the table and supporting and not expecting me and a couple of other individuals in order to respond to those particular issues? So in terms of another factor, I will also say that, as a community, we need to also just have an honest conversation and an honest conversation to the point in saying that if we don't know the answers, we should just say that we don't know, because sometimes we don't know. And I think that, with the current state of violence within the West Midlands, I think that many of us are running out of ideas. And I think that's probably located to because what we're doing is reinventing the wheel. And we're utilising old models, old ways of engaging with young people in 2018. And I've always said that if you're stuck in 1998 and you're stuck in 2001 or 2003 and the environment that was happening in the West Midlands in 2003 and trying to bring some of those systems in 2018, it might not be beneficial. So for me, as a criminologist, part of my role is not just always bringing forth solutions, but also making sense of the problem. And I think that a lot of us are very passionate about working with young people. I think we're very passionate about wanting to engage with the issue, but many of us don't understand where young people are at. And how I know that is I've delivered series of workshops and seminars up and down the countries. And I always test professionals, frontline professionals. I test them in terms of slang, language, some statistics of why things like mentoring is not being so effective in current times. Not that the philosophy of mentoring is not effective, but why isn't it working? And when you ask professionals, they have no clue. So that demonstrates to me that the passion is good, but the passion needs to be connected to intellect, to knowledge that enables you to be able to navigate your way successfully and effectively in environments that many of us are finding very hard to understand. So I do believe that there's going to be more murders to come. There's going to be, unfortunately, more young people that we're going to have to bury in our community. And it's a sad state of affairs.